So here's the big news. This major attack in Moscow at the concert hall. Islamic State claims responsibility. I'm just going to come out right away and say doubt, but okay. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack on the Moscow concert hall that left at least 40 people killed. I believe you said, Jack, earlier, it's up before the show, it's up to 70 now?
I'm seeing 70. Of course, I'll just do the preface, your disclaimer that this thing is ongoing. It's happening in real time. The attack happened just a couple hours before we went live here. Security services, we know, are going through the center right now. So take everything we say as being within the fog of war. This is a real-time situation. It's actually going on. And I believe I'm even hearing stuff that I look into that say that they're still chasing after some of the terrorists, and elements of the Wagner group and even Russian Spetsnaz are up in Moscow trying to go after these guys.
Okay. ISIS?
I mean, that would seem like a stretch because ISIS, as everyone knows, was, at least in terms of the physical caliphate, was destroyed during the Trump administration, where we had this orange man as president who did very, very bad things to ISIS, and they went away. But what people also don't always realize is that ISIS was also fighting Russia in Syria. So certainly would have motive. There's no question about that. It's just been that we haven't really heard from them in years, and all of a sudden pop up in the middle of Moscow, right after Putin has this huge victory, right after Ukraine got absolutely bombed to the Stone Age last night.
I got a conspiracy theory.
Are there subversives in the Caucasus that could be trained up to do something like this? Certainly. But the idea that this has nothing to do with Ukraine is frankly just ludicrous.
I think it could be Russia.
That's what I was thinking too.
What would the objective be for Ukraine? What is their gain militaristically, strategically, of attacking this concert hall? There is an obvious one: shock, terror.
Yes,
you fight us, we bring this to your home.
You will down on themselves. Yeah.
Yes.
But also making sure the people of Russia that are supporting it know that this is not something you can hide from. We'll bring it to you. There's also I believe that's the most likely. The slightly or a bit less likely, but still very probable, is Russia doing it to itself, because they could then point the finger at anybody they want.
I suppose, and I've heard like Malcolm Nance said that, and some other people, but it's,
Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist now, huh?
And no, he's always been a conspiracy theorist.
He's a clown.
He can track artillery pieces and shells flying overhead. Never seen a fast mover before. They come in threes, and it's like, there's number 4. Oops. But so the idea being that, if you're Russia and you're Putin right now, you're saying that we defeated the Ukrainian counteroffensive. I've just been reelected, and he's claiming victory. And not to get into the whole. By the way, I love how they say, "Well, there's statistical anomalies in Putin's election." I'm like, "Oh, really? So statistical anomalies are allowed to be a verifier for whether or not an election is legitimate or not?" Interesting. Wonder if there's any other countries we can apply that to. But Putin wants to project strength right now, and the worst possible thing for projecting strength would be showing that your capital can be attacked and that your people can be just merciful. I don't know if we played any of the videos yet. We were just watching them, but I don't even know if YouTube will.
I don't think we can play. I mean, look,
some of this stuff, because it's not censored yet or anything.
Merciless videos that I don't think we can.
This
play.
is similar to Phil. You and I were talking before. It's similar to Bataclan. In I think it was November of 2015 or so in Paris, and. I mean, but the difference being there's more powerful social media now, and so you can actually see videos from inside as people were posting them online of these machine gun wielding assailants, militants, walking around and just slaughtering people, forcing people into a corner. And stop me if I'm going too far, but forcing people into a corner and for YouTube, I mean, and just gunning them all down. And these are innocent civilians at a concert hall. So, of course, the United States very quickly had to say, we don't think Ukraine had anything to do with this. Fastest investigation in world history, by the way. Faster than the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, as a matter of fact. And they have to do this because if there's even a whiff of the CIA being involved in this, then that means all of our taxpayer dollars going to fund Ukraine, going to fund this war, just funded that attack that you just saw. And keep in mind that, there's this clip that Alex Jones just posted when I was on InfoWars at the beginning of March, saying that there are going to be terrorist attacks coming in Moscow.
We have
that this phase of the war, that the war was moving into a new phase, an insurgency phase.
We have the article actually right here from National Review. State Department warns of imminent terror attack in Moscow, warns America to avoid crowds from March 8th. I mean, that's wild.
Well, I mean, look, there's one thing that I want to say about this. Like, the United States has had and clearly still does have the most advanced and the most comprehensive surveillance apparatus in human history. So just because they got wind of something doesn't mean that they were planning something or they were involved in funding.
No, of course.
So
no, but there have been terror attacks, not to this scale in Moscow. There have been the drone strikes. So for the U.S. to warn,
well, and Daria Dugina. So
exactly.
Dugin's daughter was car bombed in an assassination that, you know, it's questionable. So Alexander Dugin, for people who don't know, is like this high profile writer, political theorist, etc., within Russia and outside, and people have called him, like, and it's, you know, debatable whether this is true, but they've called him Putin's brain, and he's very ideological and has called for a mass, you know, revamping and reordering of all the Russian-speaking peoples into one country. And they said that, you know, this is kind of similar to where Putin gets some of these ideas that he espoused on Tucker. And anyway, they blew up his car, but his daughter happened to be driving it, and so people aren't sure if they were targeting him or targeting her. Obviously, a very high level attack. It was carried out with precision in Moscow, more than likely by Ukrainian intelligence. Certainly,
you mean
I would
US
say at this
intelligence?
point, with U.S. intelligence backing, the same way as Nord Stream 2. And the idea that, look, we just had the New York Times article at the beginning of March that predicated all of this, which is before I went on InfoWars and made my prediction, before the State Department came out. And Phil specifically said concerts, specifically used the word concerts within 48 hours.
The warning did?
The warning did, specifically the word concerts, and said extremists are targeting public gatherings, including concerts.
Wow.
So they specifically used the word concerts. And we had that New York Times article that said the CIA has spent a decade building a dozen bases across the borderlands of Ukraine and Russia, which is funny because the word Ukraine means borderland itself. And specifically that they were training up this guy, Kirilo Budanov, who has just been appointed the head of Ukraine's intelligence services. And at the time they were talking about maybe positioning him as the head of all of Ukraine's intelligence services. This is the CIA's man in Kiev. And so that all happens. Victoria Nuland all of a sudden just suddenly like disappears from the scene. And I said, look, it's very clear what's going on. They're going to move into the insurgency phase of this. They understand that they're going to be losing at least the 4 oblasts that they've already lost, probably, or at this point, well, going back at this point, definitely 4 more. And given what we've seen and this level of atrocity now, if Putin believes that Ukraine had even a whiff of involvement of this, I mean, I want to be anywhere near Zelensky right now.
But also
is right in the bunker.
Does it even matter if they do or do not? Russia, Vladimir Putin must operate under the assumption it was Ukraine. There's no other assumptions
I'll
to
say
make.
Everyone in Russia, the perception-wise, is going to blame this on Ukraine and the United States.
Yeah,
and so is everyone in China, and so is everyone in the global South, and so is pretty much anyone who's looking at this thing. Nobody's going to say this was ISIS.
As it comes to war, I often say it doesn't matter what's true. Clearly, the truth matters to a great degree for history and policy, but in terms of what escalates conflict, I mean, it could be the plumb truth that a bunch of ISIS radicals did this, but it doesn't matter because you have an entire nation that's going to be who's our enemy, who stands to gain, why would we be attacked, and we're the enemy right now.
How did World War I start?
Yeah.
It was so sure it was a Serbian nationalist assassinating the heir to the Habsburg Empire. So the heir of the Habsburgs, the heir to Austria-Hungary. But then that triggers a war with Russia, which triggers a war with France, and everybody knows how all the alliances worked out. It's about the domino effect.
I even forgot to mention in the opening that Kate Middleton came out and said she had cancer. I mean, like,
That's
this
really
is
sad.
a wild day.
Really sad.
Wild day.
The situation going on in Russia, it speaks to what we've all been discussing for the past year since the invasion started, which is you don't know what is going to happen that would escalate, and I don't see how Russia doesn't look at this as an attack on on them from the Ukraine. Everybody knows that they're going to try and escalate. So it's just a matter of what does Putin get out of, or what does he want to target in Ukraine? Because he's got all the excuse he needs now. So whatever idea that he may have had in his head that he was like, wait, but maybe I can do this or maybe I can't do that when it comes to doing some kind of decisive move to end in the hopes of ending the Russian war, he's got all the excuse that he could possibly want right now.
Well, and remember too that in Russia and the way they view the conflict and the way most Russians view the conflict is not necessarily, they're not like, it's not like they hate Ukraine and they just want to destroy Ukraine, right? They view this as an existential war with the collective West. So they view that the West has declared war on them. And this is what Putin was essentially trying to get across to Tucker. And when Tucker says, why did you invade Ukraine? And his response was, well, from our perspective, we were invaded. Yeah. And now what do you have in France? You have Macron going out there and saying, we're going to send thousands of troops from France into Western Ukraine. You've heard the new Polish president, the new globalist Polish president, Donald Tusk, saying that he's going to do the similar with Polish troops. And so what you're really looking at now is a Syrianization of the conflict. And I laid all this out a while back. And if you look at Syria and how the Syrian civil war played out, and it's amazing, like even ISIS is showing up, right? So I said there would be a Syrianization of the conflict wherein the government controls part of the country. Then there's another part of the country that's controlled by quote unquote separatist groups. You'll see terrorist attacks all over the place. Russia will come in and stabilize some areas. And then you'll just see little pockets of American and Western troops coming in to quote unquote stabilize various areas. And I laid this out an entire month ago. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out here. So we're going to see a frozen conflict. We don't know exactly where that line is going to be drawn at this point, but I would be very surprised, given the ferocity and brutality of this attack. I'd be very surprised if Putin would be interested in allowing the current regime to stay in power in Kiev.
You know, we're having that solar eclipse on the 8th.
Yes, very excited.
And there was the other solar eclipse back in October, which draws an X right over Eagle Pass. And
I saw people talking about
and
that.
I don't know how much of it is true, but people are saying, like someone mentioned on the show, that the eclipse is going to travel through like 5 different cities named Nineveh.
Nineveh.
Nineveh or something.
Nineveh, yeah, wow.
What is that?
They misspoke, but Nineveh was like the story in the Bible. They talk a lot about the city of Nineveh. I think it was in.
That's where Jonah was supposed to go.
Really?
Yeah, joining the whale. He was.
Is that true? The eclipse is going over that city?
Someone said it went over 5 cities called Nevea, but they misspoke and they meant to say Nineveh. I haven't double checked though. I haven't checked.
Oh man, I'm like, I don't know that I can believe any of this stuff, but I actually had a couple people ask me who are normies. Totally, they were like, do you think there's even an election if like a war breaks out? Like somebody who doesn't pay attention to politics but knows enough that this stuff's going on in Russia, Ukraine, Israel.
I get asked that question so often.
Yeah. Like, do you think we even have I'm like,
well,
wow.
Ukraine already canceled theirs. So
right.
here's another big thing that's coming up. Zelensky's term. So Zelensky's term, because he's the president, is actually set to end 2 months from today, essentially. It's like the end of May, like May 21st, May 22nd. So the question then is, if he's only the legal president until the end of May, then if Russia wanted to conduct an operation against this guy, they could easily say he's not a legitimate president because his term ended and he's ruling by fiat and military action.
Well, so here's an honest question. With several oblasts in Ukraine already outside of Ukrainian control, they cannot hold an election. They can hold an election in the territories they control, but certainly not in the Donbass region. Some people...
Well, they already weren't.
Before the control of the Russians?
Before 2022, they were in national elections, didn't include Kiev or the separatist areas.
It didn't include Kiev?
Oh, excuse me, not Kiev, Crimea.
Crimea. Right. Well, obviously not Crimea since 2014 or whatever, but the Donbass was not included.
Correct.
Okay, fair point. The argument made by many on the left is like, how do you have an election when you've lost territory in a war? Plainly, as they've already done, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting too, because Zelensky has a lot of deep-seated opposition within his own country. There are people who said that he hasn't conducted the war well. There are people who have pointed out, and the average Ukrainian doesn't actually know how many people were killed in the counteroffensive. They have no clue. They're totally psyoping everybody about how many people they lost and how many casualties they took, and that ridiculous just throwing people against the Russian lines. And So you've got Petro Poroshenko, the previous president who ran against Zelensky in his first election in 2018. You've got 18 or 19, and you've got a lot of people, by the way, like, so people don't remember this, but Zelensky was actually very unpopular before the war started because of the lockdowns. It's this like totally separate. Oh yeah, remember that? It's like on the previous season. And there were protests in Maidan Square against Zelensky because they thought he was too harsh on the lockdown policies and he was pushing the vaccines too much, and foreshadowing. And then it was sort of this like Avengers bearded Zelensky that comes out in the face of the war, who gets this huge row of support. But then as the war's gone south, just like has happened in many situations, like, I don't know, South Vietnam, for example, the leader who we thought was the stalwart defender of freedom is now viewed as kind of like a loser, kind of pathetic, saying you can't win on the battlefield. We need somebody fresh in there. And problem with that is, you make those deals with the CIA. CIA puts you on an early retirement plan pretty quick.
Yeah, I just had a totally normie person just say something came up about the Red Sea trading and like China, and then jumped right to, and then when the war starts, they won't have elections, and then you don't got to worry about Biden or Trump. And I was like, oh man, maybe that's, we keep talking about what's the Democrat plan for Joe Biden. He's not popular. They don't got anything. Yeah, it could be, how can we have an election when, we're currently under attack? Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.